So we are excited to introduce our last speaker of the day before our panel, Dr. Layal Shuman, an assistant professor here at GCM. Dr. Shuman is joining us today from Toronto, Ontario. She'll be speaking on the topic design within the curriculum and the importance of putting humanity first and design second. Questions will be answered after the presentation during our allotted Q&A period. Please welcome Dr. Layal Shuman. You're good to share your screen.
Hi, everybody. Hello. Let me do that. Where is it? Hi. As usual, let me just set up so I'm not confused about what I'm doing. Now, what happened there? Yeah. Okay, folks. So I would like to. So my name is Layal. My pronouns are she, her. I would like to just clarify something. And as many of you know, I can't multitask, so I'm probably not going to read the chat. So this is not a conversation about the state of design education at GCM. However, I'm hoping that after I finish the talk, you can ask me questions about my practices at GCM and things I do in relation to that. However, I'm gonna build on what Hillary said, the idea that how can it as inclusivity and accessible design be central, so it's not just a detail, something we think about later on. And as a design education researcher, and somebody who teaches design, I want to put the responsibility on my shoulder, on our shoulders as design educators, and doing better for you, so that by the time you graduate, you're already inclusivity and justice is already very much a part of your training. So that is what this talk is about today. So I'll share with you some of my thoughts around it. But it is focused on humanity first. And also, for those of you who know me, there's no way I'm implying that human beings are superior to other living beings, right? But I just want to, within the context of the conference, I want us to focus on humanity first, design later, and you'll understand more why I'm saying that. So a conversation about how we teach and learn design. So we're all good? Okay. So I'm going to be reading, okay. So over the past 2 years, the world has witnessed a global pandemic and the surfacing of social, environmental, and economic challenges. These challenges indicate inequitable political systems and reveal a world designed only to serve a few. Whether design outputs, products, services, and artifacts reflect or perpetuate social injustices is outside the scope of this talk. Nevertheless, a timely conversation is a responsibility that falls on us, design educators and designers, to rid design of its tight bonds with current hegemonic structures and worldviews that prioritize groups of people over others. So this is very important, whether we're talking accessibility or inclusivity. So how does design perpetuate injustice? Because it does a lot, so many times, right? I call for design education to shift to more justice-centered and justice-informed curricula to arrive at a day where topics such as accessibility and inclusion are central to design, where products are not considered. Where products, you see, I shouldn't look at the chat because then I'll get distracted. Where products are not considered designed, if they are not inclusive and accessible, why not? Why isn't that something that is required? If it's not there, we don't call it design. Or at least they do not perpetuate social and economic exclusions and harms. So how does design education connect to the colloquium's broader topics about accessibility and inclusivity? So again, since design curricula, and when I say design, again, like my background is visual communication design and graphic design, but also this could stretch to other areas, but we can keep it within the context of visual communication design and graphic design. Okay, so because again, like design curricula and design education is so big of a topic, I want to focus on a few things, okay? So I want to focus in this talk on students' early encounters with design at university. In other words, how they first learned to design in introductory courses. And I want to propose that changing students' definitions and changing your definitions, especially at the foundational years, of what constitutes designing at early stages of their education can potentially lead to more inclusive and accessible design outputs in the future. We can't train people a certain way, they graduate, and then we ask why they're not performing in another way, right? The same thing applies to inclusivity and accessibility. So given the time I have, again, I'm just gonna mention a few things, okay? So humanity first, technique and technology later. And after the talk, I would like you to reflect also on other disciplines that this applies to, right? And see how it can resonate what I'm saying. So learning design as mastering technical skills first is an old approach inspired by design education at the Bauhaus in Germany many decades ago. And largely still the case in Western and Westernized design curricula. This means students complete foundational courses to hone their technical skills before proceeding to courses that present them with more complex assignments. Nowadays, students learn to achieve specific visual outputs using design programs such as Adobe Photoshop and InDesign. They are rewarded for mastering computer skills with assessment focused on learning technique and technologies related to design. How does this relate to justice-informed design curricula, you may ask? The challenge to cultivating future designers that put humanity first in their work, when they have learned at university that design equals skills mastery, is that they have been educated to consider sophisticated technical executions as essential to designing. When students enter the world of design through an education that teaches them to prioritize technique over other design criteria, it is difficult to ask them later to make people centered to their design processes, even if it means the outputs are not technically and technologically sophisticated. I argue that we need to shift this approach in design education to humanity first, technique and technology later. Another entry point into design that is a bit complex, which is creativity. So, learning design, okay, where am I? Yes. So let us move to another early encounter with design, which is students learning what constitutes creative design outputs. Through practices such as design portfolios, think about it for a second. I know all of these things we do, but think about what they mean beyond their actual thing. Design portfolios, design awards, design trends, even design critiques. Current approaches to design curricula teach students that creativity is a solo activity that relies on individual talent. We might be encouraging group work in our classes, but if these practices do not shift our notions of design as individualistic and based on some divine talent, will remain the same. Another practice that hinders an understanding of design creativity as contextual and not individualistic is assessing creativity in design projects. Again, I'm putting the responsibility on us as design educators. So these are things that I'm guilty of as well, that I try to peel off my practice. So assessing creativity in design projects. How much of final grades prioritize a commitment to humanity, inclusivity, and accessibility before a commitment to principles of visual composition, or alignment with current design trends that we reinforce through examples that we share in class of what constitutes good design? And then we ask designers who have been taught and rewarded for artistic expression over generating solutions based on people's needs and wants to suddenly change into the belief that no theory or principle in design is above honoring people. Because again, our work shouldn't be considered design without it being committed to the communities we design for or we represent through our design. I argue that we need to shift this approach in design education to humanity and creativity for the collective first, and never for individualistic goals, never. Now, this is a complex conversation. You might say, where is my subjectivity and all of that? But we can talk about that. It's not erasing ourselves. It's thinking collectively. Collectively as group work, collectively as what is our work doing? Now, another complex thing here is people as consumers is another very complex thing in design curricula that also it complicates things for us having central to our work justice. Most of our teaching in design considers people as consumers. We teach students to consider people and their solutions, but the relationship between design services and products and people is rooted in economic gains. When the intentions have more social dimensions, such as when we teach students to design social awareness campaigns or develop ideas for social innovations, this way of thinking about people as consumers is weakened, but never erased. If you reflect on how we articulate design's connections to people, you will notice that we often emphasize that design is effective when it serves the people who will consume our outputs. I use the term outputs for all different things that are products of design. So I'm going to repeat that. You will notice that we often emphasize that design is effective when it serves the people who will consume our outputs. And through their consumption, their humanity matters. However, this way of thinking about people teaches us to neglect many groups because we are fixated on consumption and designing for those who consume or who are able to consume our work for a variety of reasons. As a result, humanity becomes defined by consumerism, a dangerous outcome that pushes us away from justice-focused and justice-informed design practice. Let me see how I can jump. So I'm gonna move. Okay, so I'm just gonna move so that Aisha's telling me about the time, so I don't. Aisha, now you confused me. Where am I? I have no idea. Okay, so I'm just going to say one thing and move into the last part. In recent years, because I feel this is important, there has been an increasing adoption of frameworks that promote and claim considering people in design beyond consumerism, notably human-centered design and design thinking frameworks, which I teach to students. Some of you know that in some of my courses. However, these frameworks only complicate matters for justice-focused and justice-informed design education and practice because they often make us feel good about ourselves without going through the work we need to do better, right? So let me explain more a bit before Aisha turns off the Zoom on me. As an educator, I might teach human-centered design principles to challenge the notion that people are not only design consumers, but human beings with lived experiences, loved ones, dreams, hopes, and fears. However, if I do not invite students to question who is included and excluded when we design with human-centered design and design thinking frameworks, or what systemic conditions and structures lead to the inclusion and exclusion of certain groups from design and technology products, my teaching will lead to the same place that I wanted students to avoid, which is designing for the few who are able to consume. If design's relationship to economic production within capitalist system is not challenged in design education, it doesn't matter what we call people. The outcomes remain the same. Design curricula will continue to teach about people as consumers first. And with that, designers would exclude many groups and unintentionally perpetuate current injustices. Should I continue or stop? How many more minutes, Afrah, do I have?
So you're currently at 13 minutes.
Whoa!
Maybe 2 more minutes or so.
Oh yeah, let me see how fast I can read. Okay, so how can we move from here? So how can we move from where we are today to design curricula that is committed to justice first? We must first acknowledge that teaching design is connected to teaching worldviews, because design services and products currently serve people who belong to dominant social positions. Extend that to topics about accessibility, everything else. Think about it, right? What design does. Of course, we can argue that teaching generally requires examining the political dimensions of the types of knowledge that we share with students. However, the responsibility is particularly significant for teaching design because up until today, we have not yet figured out how to teach design outside of historical ties with economic production and the capitalist sense. When I say capitalist sense, that implies racist, sexist, and all of those different things intertwined with capitalism. We have yet to imagine design in the Western world beyond its current relationships with capitalism and beyond a global North understanding of what human progress is. Okay, I'm going to wrap up with the last minute. It may sound like an impossible task, but small changes do make significant differences. For example, imagine if design curricula taught students to understand and commit to humanity first before we get to design. Imagine foundational years in social theory, design and innovations connections to political economies. Imagine learning about indigenous philosophies and ways of being and Black feminist thought before attempting at designing any services and products. What if we can only design after we have completed training in critical thinking? What types of designers and practitioners graduate after such pedagogical experiences? Would we still discuss the need for inclusive, accessible, and equitable design services? If students learned inclusive, accessible, and equitable as fundamental to designing products, services, and visuals, the same way we categorize outputs as designed or not, depending on the sophistication of their visual composition, for example. What if justice-informed design was the only way to learn and practice design?
Thank you so much, Layal. That was amazing. Great feedback in the chat as well.